And on foot we go on our little walking tour. Of course, the only way to see Venice is by getting around by foot and by boat. In this case, we've walked back to our gondola station from the night before, but instead of taking a regular gondola, we're going to go on the traghetto. This is an institution in Venice. It's a gondola that just takes you across the Grand Canal from one side to the other. You see here a lot of the locals stand up while they ride across on the traghetto. More likely you'll want to sit down for a little bit of added stability and security, which is fine. There's seats along the edges of the traghetto, and it's a very cheap ride. This is your 50-cent gondola ride. It just takes a minute to get from one side of the Grand Canal to the other, and it's a real convenience because there's not very many bridges that cross the Grand Canal. There's the Rialto Bridge, the Station Bridge, and the Academia Bridge, and that's it. The Grand Canal is just over 2 miles long, and with only 3 bridges crossing it, you might have to walk quite a ways to find the nearest bridge if you want to walk across the Grand Canal. So you can take a shortcut, take a traghetto. And you'll find them, you can look on your map, or you'll find the signs up on the buildings pointing towards the traghetto. In this case, we've crossed from Cadoro over to the old marketplace. This is the fruit and vegetable market of the city. And while the traghetto is larger than a gondola, it still takes a couple of trips to get all 30 of us across the Grand Canal. The marketplace is a very colorful spot. Just as in any city in Europe, you always want to try and make a beeline for the vegetable market, particularly in the morning, because that's when the activity is quite busy and quite colorful. Fresh beans and fresh fruits and strawberries and apples and oranges. Many of these produce are grown right in the region of the Veneto around Venice. After all, Italy is a major agricultural country, and some of it's brought in from Africa. Admiring the Gothic architecture as we walk our way through the narrow back streets near the Rialto Market. This is a part of town that very often the typical tourist never finds because it's not by Piazza San Marco. So when you're over on this side of the Grand Canal, you'll find mostly local people, especially in the morning here. The shops haven't quite yet opened, and it's mostly local people walking to work. This is the kind of activity that we always include in our Hawaii Geographic Society tours of Europe, and that we would encourage you to do if you're traveling through Europe on your own. That is, get away from the main busy tourist areas, get off the beaten track, and go wandering amongst the neighborhoods where the locals live and where the locals work. And this is the way you can really get a feeling for the place. We're walking through the district of Venice that's called San Polo. Venice is divided into 6 different districts, and on this particular walk we're going roughly from the Rialto to the Academia Museum, past the Campo San Paolo and past the Frari Church and past the university. So that gives you some idea, if you're following along or you'd like to follow along, as to where we're walking. And there's many little footbridges in the neighborhood, as there are throughout the entire city. There's 400 bridges in Venice, little bridges, medium-sized bridges, and only 3 big bridges across the Grand Canal, as we mentioned. Each bridge is a little bit different, and from each bridge you always get a beautiful view, whether it's of a window or the vista of the canal. Looking up the walls of these ancient buildings is certainly one of the thrills of being in Venice. So don't just walk with your head down, of course. You want to be walking to see where you're going and to see what's around you. In this case, we're in the house of Goldoni. It's a museum. He was one of the great comic playwrights of the 18th century. Some of the bridges are made of metal, some are made of marble, others are made of brick, and they're all beautiful. Each one is distinct and unique. These 400 bridges tie together 100 muddy islands. This was the foundation of Venice. It was a series of small muddy islands that was first settled about the year 600 by fishermen escaping the barbarian invasions. Here we're walking through the university district of the town. And Venice grew up over the centuries into a thriving trading city that at one point became the most powerful city in the world. During the 14th century, Venice was the crossroads of East and West, and goods from the Orient came pouring through the city and on their way up into Europe, and the Venetian noblemen and merchants were in position to reap vast fortunes. And this continued for several hundred more years. And then by the 16th century, with the discovery of other routes around to Asia, around Africa, Venice lost a lot of its strategic importance, but continued as an important art center. The arts that you see today at the Accademia Museum are the result of the flourishing of the wealth of the city in the 16th century on into the 17th and even into the 18th century. So here we are in the Accademia, which has the finest collection of Venetian Renaissance art to be found any place in the world. The 15th century is represented here mostly by Giovanni Bellini and Carpaccio, and the 16th by a rare painting by Giorgione, The Tempest, and Titian and Tintoretto and Veronese and Lorenzo Lotto, as well as many other remarkable artists of the 16th century. And equally well represented are the 17th and 18th centuries with paintings by Tiepolo, Piazzetta, and Longhi, and some delicate pastels by Rosalba Carrera. The collection of drawings includes several masterpieces by Leonardo da Vinci and an entire sketchbook by Canaletto, the great artist who immortalized the canals of Venice in his oil paintings as well as his sketches. A great art museum like the Accademia should be appreciated very slowly. While this museum is small enough to cover in 1 hour or 2 hours, it really deserves more than that. You should visit it and come back again. You should study a little bit of the Venetian art beforehand. If you're planning a trip to Venice, by all means, read up on the Venetian Renaissance and you will appreciate the artworks that much more. The more you can bring into it, the more you will carry out of it. The Accademia is also a teaching academy. This is where it got its original name. And even today, there are students who are attached to this great institution. The ceilings, too, are works of art in themselves. It's a divine experience. When you're in Venice, please make the time to go to the Accademia.